All right, I am having a discussion today with a theist who, according to her description, rejects religion. So we're going to have a discussion and kind of delve more into her position and do some critiques. I might critique her position, she may critique mine, and we'll just see where it goes. Her name is Kat, and I found her on the Debate Faith Forum on Facebook. And we never talked before, so we'll just go ahead and proceed forth and see how it pans out. So, Kat, you said that you are a theist, but you reject religion. Could you kind of flesh that out and tell me exactly what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can just start by like going over my religious history kind of. I was born, like, my dad's Jewish, my mom was Irish Catholic, but it was never religion was never really a big thing in my household. I was baptized Episcopalian, went to an Episcopalian church a couple times, went to Catholic school for the first like 6 years of my schooling. Kind of went through and like religion was never really a factor to me. Kind of started studying it a bit more in middle school, high school, learned a lot more. Kind of didn't really buy it anymore as being like fact or an accurate history of what happened or whatever you want to call it. But and then I don't know, I was kind of an atheist for a little while, and then after my mom passed away, I like had some personal experiences and just like some other few things that like unexplainable things that kind of reignited a belief in a god. So I do identify as a theist because technically I am a theist by definition. I believe in a creator god. I believe in a god that sometimes has a part in what happens around the world. And yeah, that's pretty much what theism is. So
So you believe in a personal creator?
yeah.
Okay, interesting. So you're Episcopalian, and you went to Catholic school. I can't help but wonder how that happened.
Yeah, the schooling was more just quality of school, like just, more money and stuff like that. My parents wanted me to have a slightly better education or whatever you want to call it, so they
Right.
put me to the Catholic school. My dad was actually the only Jew on the PTA at the Catholic school. It was pretty funny, but and I don't know, I can't remember what the issue was that someone had with that school. I think it was my parents. I wasn't really. I was like I left that when I was in fourth grade. I went to public school when I was in fifth grade. I wasn't really focused on too much of anything. Um, and then yeah, it's just I went to Episcopal. My mom, it was more for the community. Like if you know Episcopalians, they're kind of like the most open, accepting almost of like all the Christian denominations. They were like the first to start officiating homosexual marriages, things like that. Um, and yeah, so I enjoyed that a little bit. Went a couple times. I think we went regularly for like a year or two, and then my mom kind of got sick and we didn't go as much. So I kind of drift in every now and then when I'm home. Like I moved. When I go home, sometimes I'll spend a holiday there or two. But it's just really for the community. It's a good community, and yeah.
Well, I have met people who have graduated from Catholic high schools, and
Hmm.
I've met a lot of them are very smart,
Yeah.
and the quality of education at a lot of Catholic schools in comparison to a lot of the public schools.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with funding and everything like that.
Right. So, a lot of times it's better than the public schools, but it does depend. But there are, of course, variations in that. There are some public schools that are much better than others, for instance.
Yeah, yeah. It was just in
So,
our area that was the better school.
right. So, okay. All right. Let me ask you. You said that there were some things that led you away from Christianity. What was it? What things were those that led you away from Christianity?
Just researching it really. I think there's a saying out there like if you want to turn someone to an atheist, tell them to read the Bible, which I think is that's a little far, but it's not too far off to at least make them kind of skeptical when you really look into how the Bible was created, how the words that are on the page are actually on the page, not just the story behind it, but the actual history of the Bible itself. And even when you think about it, the idea of religion itself to an extreme, such as like Christianity would be, where you like know for a fact God said these things and yada yada.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about history.
Mm-hmm.
Have you studied philosophy? Have you been really involved in that aspect in your studies?
Philosophy, not so much.
Okay.
Like very like it'll bleed into it, but it's not something I focus on.
Okay. Let me just you flesh out your position some. Let me flesh out mine.
Okay.
I am what you might call a Clarkean presuppositionalist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like many other philosophers in schools of philosophy, I believe that whenever we're building our philosophical framework, our worldview, so to speak,
Yeah.
we have to start with an area called epistemology, which you may already know what that means. But for those who do not, epistemology is the study of if we can have knowledge, and if so, how we know that we have knowledge. All right, so that's where we have to start. The first question we have to answer is simply the question, how do you know? All right, now all of us are, you can also call me a dogmatist. I start with scripture as my axiom. That's my first principle. And what that means is that my first principle, which is the propositions that are revealed in scripture, is my starting point. The reason why it's my starting point is because this proposition, the Bible alone as a written word of God, cannot be deduced from any other proposition. It
Mm-hmm.
has to be the beginning. If something were prior to it, then it would not be my first principle. It would be something else, like a theorem or something, which would be
Yeah.
a deduction from that principle. Um, so I start with the Bible, and in my approach in dealing with other worldviews, as you just shared, that you do research and you look into history and things like that. In the case of Christianity, you might read the Bible, because certainly if you're going to critique something, you need to know what it teaches.
Yeah.
Um, what I do is I argue that if you do not start with the axiom of revelation, then you are forced to admit something called skepticism, which is basically the view that one cannot know anything
Mm-hmm.
at all. All right, so that's sort of my approach, and I found that if you do not start with the Bible, there is no way to come to the conclusion of the truth of Christianity.
Okay.
All right, and the reason why is because if you start anywhere else other than the scriptures, wherever you start is going to be insufficient to prove that anything is true. So if that's the case, then you're not going to be able to show that you're not going to be able to show that Christianity is true either, because if you can't show that there is such thing as truth, then you can't say anything is true. So when you do your investigations of other worldviews, you said you looked into history and everything. Have you ever thought about where you really start whenever you're building your philosophy? Is there a starting point that you can pinpoint whenever you're critiquing philosophies and building up your own?
I mean, I guess it depends on the philosophy, but I mean, I just start under the assumption that, I don't know, everything needs to be verified somehow. Um, and there really is no start point when it comes to that, because one piece will verify another piece, and it doesn't really matter which one you have first.
Well, I'd like to submit something for your consideration,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't mind. If you do not start somewhere, can you draw conclusions?
Um, Again, that's a very, very broad question. I mean, you don't necessarily have to start something to have something happen to you that would start it, or something like an outside force starting something. I mean, it's just I don't know. I think that, yeah, you could draw a conclusion without starting something, depending on what you mean by starting something.
Well, whenever like I said, there has to be a starting point in a worldview. You have to begin somewhere, and you say that you can have an experience even if you don't start somewhere. But in order to interpret that as the experience, you do need to have some sort of frame of reference. You agree?
Yeah,
Okay, so if you
that's
don't
that's what
start
you would do.
anywhere,
You would try to learn about it and get that frame of reference.
what's that?
You would try to learn about it and then get that frame of reference.
But you have to have some sort of prior principles in which to try and investigate that which you're trying to learn about, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, and it's not, and a lot of people, when I ask people where they start, they don't know, and that's fine. A lot of people haven't reflected on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to point out so you understand when we're having this discussion where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
We all have to start somewhere, and maybe not all of us know maybe not everybody knows where they start, but they start somewhere. We're all dogmatists here. We all hold to something dogmatically.
Mm-hmm.
Some people accuse me as a Christian of forcing my own conclusions by starting with the scriptures. But I'm not forcing it any more than Immanuel Kant did whenever he tried to save empiricism from skeptical arguments. The scientific method.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think when you're starting with something like scripture, something that's been written in a book by and you need to verify that scripture.
Why should I have to verify it? Well, I guess you did say earlier that you had to be able to verify, that you should be able to verify everything, right?
Because if you're just taking that scripture unverified and then basing everything, your basis is already going to be biased, and possibly incorrect. And that's just with anything. If you take anything that you don't know and that about, and you start everything on that and you build on that, then your end result might be completely incorrect because your first piece was incorrect.
Okay, so and I want to go back to this verification thing because I think this is going to be a central contention between us.
Mm-hmm.
The statement that everything must be verified. Is that statement itself verifiable?
I mean, it's not really, because it's an opinion statement.
Then if you start with the opinion, everything must be verified.
Everything that I have to have a belief in, or everything that I would hold as true, needs to have some kind of verification behind it.
Except for the principle that you have to be able to verify your claims.
I mean, I guess, but again, that's not really it's just my personal. That's how I base my beliefs.
So is the proposition that you have to be able to verify what you believe, is that a true proposition?
Well, not verify what I believe, but verify in order to believe.
Verify in order to believe.
Yeah.
But you believe that you have to verify something in order to believe it, correct?
Sure.
Okay. But is that statement in of itself verifiable? Because if not, then it's a contradiction, right?
It's verifiable to me because then I know that I'm basing my assumption off of something that has a truth to it or has a legitimacy to it.
So you know that you're basing it off of something that has a legitimacy.
I want things to be verified so I know that I'm not I don't have the wrong thing. There's a reason, there's a verification for why I want things verified, because I don't want to believe incorrect things.
So you don't want any of your beliefs to be incorrect?
I mean, I would rather have a disbelief in something that has the potential to be correct than a belief in something that I think that is unverified or I think would be wrong.
But the principle you're starting with, you haven't verified it.
Yeah, I did. That's the verification. I don't want to believe incorrectly.
So because you want to believe incorrectly, the principle that you have to be able to verify something in order to be able to believe it, which is not itself verifiable, is an acceptable position to start from?
Which part is not verifiable?
What do you mean? I mean, you're the one arguing for that proposition, are you not?
What I'm saying is that I don't want to believe in something incorrect, so I require verification for my beliefs. That's all I'm saying.
So you're not submitting it as actually true. This is just the way you approach things.
Yeah, this is just what I will accept as truth, or I will treat as truth, or change my life for, or whatever.
Okay. Well, let's look at this process of verification that you're speaking about. Would you care to give an example?
I mean, for example, the theory of evolution, we have evidence of it, so I believe it.
What do you mean by evidence?
We have evidence of evolution. We have fossils, and we have records, and we observe it on a daily basis.
Okay. I'm sorry. You may not understand, but I asked for a definition.
A definition of what?
For evidence, not an example.
Oh, for evidence, things that can be proven to be true. Or, I mean, I guess the definition for evidence itself is just anything that suggests whatever your conclusion is, or whatever you're trying to provide evidence for. But I require, in my personal belief, I think it should be a legitimate kind of evidence that can be quantifiable and observed and verified. It's
Okay.
verified.
I just want to mention something. The word evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It's the word evidence. I really don't like that word, and I'll tell you why. Throughout the history of philosophy, that word evidence is without really a historical context. And I'll give you an example, because if I ask someone to define evidence, a lot of times they'll equivocate. They'll change the definition of it whenever they're trying to give a demonstration of how one would go about using evidence to verify a proposition. But you said a few words that I thought was interesting concerning the theory of evolution. You said basically that evidence allows you to verify something. You can see it. And I think you even used the word prove, which I think is really interesting, because typically proof is something that's approached in a deductive fashion. Do you know the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning? Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Okay. So proof is something that's done deductively. What you may call evidence, whatever that may be. Usually when people refer to evidence and they accumulate evidence, they do it in an inductive fashion. So you appeal to the theory of evolution, which I assume you would support using the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When it comes to the scientific method, all right, and a lot of people, when they talk about evolution in Christianity, or even let's say younger creationism, because I am a younger creationist, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe the Earth is about 6,000 to 10,000 years old. I don't know how old the Earth is because I don't know it down to the second. I just say it's about 6,000 to 10,000 years old, and probably closer to 6. But a lot of people will present evolution as an alternative to the origins idea of younger creationism.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the problem. The scientific method is not capable of producing knowledge. And there's a few reasons for that. The first off, whenever one starts investigating what you might call the natural world, the scientific method relies heavily on induction. And in induction, there's a couple of issues. And David Hume pointed out some of these. In induction, if you're trying to reason to a conclusion, even if the premises are true, the conclusion can still be false.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like I said earlier, whenever you're building a philosophy, when you're building a worldview, you have to start from somewhere. And an axiom, so to speak. You have to start with epistemology. So you have to be able to demonstrate, and by demonstrate, I mean show that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be able to demonstrate it. Induction doesn't do that. At best, you arrive at conclusions that's probably true or probably false. But the problem is that if you say, for instance, that it's 98% probable that general relativity is the case, if it is not the case, the actual probability of it is 0%. So you don't even know what the probability is.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the problem with the conclusion not being guaranteed with the truth of the premises. Before I go, I have other problems, but I don't want to overwhelm you. Is there anything you want to say in response to any of that?
Not unless you want to start debating creationism.
Okay. Well, I mean, we can discuss the evidences too. I'm sure that that's something you may be more comfortable in that venue. So that's something we can discuss too. I was planning on doing this for about an hour, so maybe like the last 15 or 30 minutes or so, we can, if you want to share some of the evidences, and I'll share some of the evidence of creation, we can go back and forth on that.
Do you have the time?
What's that?
Do you have the time?
Oh yeah. I don't. My bedtime's not until about an hour and 40 minutes.
No, I meant I'm probably gonna have to go in about 10 to 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. So that's what you meant by, do you have the time? You're asking what time the time is. Okay. Right. Sorry. All right. Well, that's fine. Let me go ahead and just wrap up some of the objections I have to that then. Another problem with the scientific method is that whenever you test a hypothesis, it commits a formal fallacy called asserting the consequent.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Okay. For those that do not know, asserting the consequent occurs whenever you assume that there has to be a cause for an effect. You assume there is only one possible cause for an effect, when in reality there could be a multitude of causes.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but there's another causal problem with trying to present evolution as a alternative to your creation, which is taught in the Bible. And that problem is that within the scientific method, you're assuming that there are natural causes, but there's no way of knowing from the scientific method that the causes are actually natural. So you can't even verify that the causes are natural, and that's one of the problems a lot of people have with the supernatural is, well, it can't be empirically tested. Well, neither can natural causes. It can only be assumed.
Well, I mean, only in that the alternative would be supernatural, but in my opinion, there hasn't been, I'm not going to say there's no, because I still am a theist, but there hasn't been a whole lot of supernatural, verifiable evidence, which I guess, like you said, by definition is unverifiable, but it's like if we have the verifiable method right in front of us, I'm going to lean towards that over something that I can't.
Well, you can't verify a natural cause.
I mean, in only that it could, like, only because you can't verify a supernatural cause. Like,
Why not? You mean empirically?
I'm sorry?
You mean empirically you cannot verify it?
And yeah.
Well, I agree. Empiricism can't verify anything. That's my point. That's where I'm driving at.
Okay.
I mean, the scientific method cannot produce any knowledge whatsoever. That's what I'm arguing here.
Well, only because there's always that chance that it's magic.
What do you mean by magic?
Like supernatural. Like you can't, the only reason you can't prove a natural cause is because there's the chance it could be supernatural. Like but if you eliminate that chance, then you have evidence in front of you of a reason for something happening if your hypothesis matches your conclusion.
But you cannot have evidence unless you have some sort of framework in which to interpret it in. You have to have some sort of reference to the truth, and for me as a Clarkean presuppositionalist, I hold that truth is the object of knowledge.
Well, yeah, truth is also the object of science. That's all science is just figuring out the truth of things.
But if you can't figure out the truth for the scientific method, what good is it if that's what its purpose is?
But I'm saying that you can if you eliminate the supernatural factor.
How would you eliminate it?
By dismissing it and just looking at the natural causes.
So just dismissing it offhand?
I mean, until there's something that isn't explainable. Yeah, because the supernatural is by definition the unexplained.
Well, explaining something and the explanation actually being the case are two different things.
What do you mean?
Well, let me give you an example. A long time ago, there were a bunch of cows that were dying from a disease.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and this was a big problem because it was hurting a lot of the farming industry. You can't get meat if your cows are dying of diseases. Who's going to buy meat from diseased cows? Who's going to let you sell meat from diseased cows? Right?
Yeah.
Same thing for milk. You can't have milk if your cows are dead.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to try and figure out a solution to this problem. So they came up with a vaccine. And they did a test. They did an empirical test. The cows that had the vaccine, a lot of them lived, whereas the ones that did not get the vaccine died of the disease.
Mm-hmm.
So they concluded that the vaccine cured the cows. All right, but later on, they caught somebody that was given the vaccinations. They were ripping them off. They were withholding the vaccination and inserting cows with water instead.
Mm-hmm.
But the cows that were inserted with water still lived, whereas the other ones that were not inserted with water died. So the same result. Now, we thought it was a vaccine that cured it, but then it turns out that wasn't the vaccine, even though we thought it was. So we had an explanation, but the explanation turned out to be false. Now, get this. Later on, after that occurrence of finding that person that was inserting water into the cows, they decided they're going to do another experiment and shoot air up into the cows and see if they survive. They did it, and the cows that were shot up with air lived, and then the cows that were not died. So even though we had all these explanations as to why the cow lives, we still don't know what cured the cows. We had explanations, but they all turned out to be false. So just because you can explain something and speculate on what natural causes might lead to the effects, it does not necessarily mean that explanation you're giving is actually true. And if that's the case, then science is not able to lead it to truth.
That's what science is. Like, that what you did was science. You kept testing, and you kept checking new things, and you kept learning more information. That's the difference between science and like religion. You have all the answers. That's how it is. That's set in stone. Science doesn't do that. It's you keep learning. You tried the vaccine seemed to work. You tried the water seemed to work. You tried the air, that seemed to work. So you're just getting closer and closer to the actual what it is. Like that's what science is. Science isn't just this is what it is, it's a process.
Well, first off, whenever we were investigating that, the question was what cured the cows.
Yeah.
But that question was never answered. Insofar as your examples are concerned,
it was a placebo effect that cured the cows, and that would be the suggestion if you wanted, like, and yeah.
How do you know that a placebo effect actually cured the cows?
Because placebo effects have been proven to be effective in humans, and it's not a broad leap to make the assumption that it could be similar to cows. The cows that felt the shot or got the shot thought that something might be wrong with them. Their immune system boosted into overdrive and kept them from getting sick and dying.
But if it is the case that we have to verify everything, should we avoid assuming?
Well, yeah, but that's why you wouldn't say the placebo effect definitely cured the cows. That would just be a suggestion.
So we don't really know, right?
Why? I mean, if you wanted to know, you could continue to test and you could continue to do it until you eventually found out. I mean, there'd have to be some answer, but...
Well, no matter the result, though, if we take logic into consideration, and by logic I mean the study of necessary inference, if we're going to take logic into consideration, no matter what happens when we experiment, we could inadvertently attribute the effect to what we think the cause is, which may be inserting air into the cows or inserting water into the cows. The point is, with all that, is we don't know what cured the cows, and we don't know, and we even don't know if putting water in the cows or putting air in the cows or the vaccine in the cows is actually what saved them, or if it wasn't some sort of coincidence.
Well, I mean, that's a pretty ridiculous coincidence.
You may think it's ridiculous, but we still don't know what cured the cows, right?
But that you could find out if you wanted to.
How?
By continuing to test on it.
But every hypothesis commits the fallacy of asserting the consequent.
That's what. No,
I mean, because you hold logic in high regard, right?
Yes.
So why would somebody, instead of recognizing the limitations of the scientific method in regard to seeking truth, why would someone instead turn around and dismiss logic in the favor of these empirical tests, if these empirical tests clearly are using a fallacious method of reasoning?
Well, I think that's not necessarily a fallacious method of reasoning when you're dealing with the scientific method. That's kind of a little bit different than if you're dealing with some kind of other logical issue.
Well, I mean, why is the scientific method excused from this fallacy?
Because the scientific method doesn't make claims without verified evidence.
But whenever you were rebutting what I said concerning the example that I gave the cows, though, you said a lot of things like, if we assume this, if we assume that, you can't. I mean, by what you're saying, you cannot make assumptions without verifying them, right?
No, you make the assumption and then you work to verify it. That's what science is.
You make the assumption, then you work to verify it.
Yes.
Okay. Give me an example if you don't mind.
With pretty much the scientific method, you make the assumption, your hypothesis, and then you take the steps to verify it, and then you can draw conclusions based on the steps you've taken to verify it.
Like,
that's all science is saying, hey, what if this is a thing? Let's do some tests, see if that's actually a thing. If it's not a thing, okay. If it is a thing, let's continue to explore it more. That's what science.
But if it's a test, if you test it though, and things go according to the way you predict it,
that's why
is it possible that your conclusion that you draw from that experiment is actually false?
Yes, and if it's proven to be false, which eventually it probably would be, then you would continue to. That's the thing. Science is just a continuation. Everything.
Then verified ideas can still be false.
Yes, depending on the verification, depending on new technologies, depending on a lot of things. It was considered the Earth was flat to be a verified idea for a long time.
It is flat.
I've flown around
the Earth. I'm just kidding.
I have flown around the Earth.
All right. So, but see, my question. See, this is the problem I have, and it may be, obviously we have completely different philosophies. We obviously have a completely different way of thinking from each other.
Mm-hmm.
But my problem is that in the beginning of the conversation, I argued that if you try and start anywhere other than the Bible, which I don't know how much time you have, but I do want to give you a chance to critique
I have
my
about
view.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Well, I said that if we start with the Bible, if I start with if you don't start with the Bible, you wind up in skepticism. If you cannot demonstrate that you can have knowledge, then your philosophy is skepticism. That's all I'm arguing. And if you have these instances where you verify something and it turns out to be false, then the verification is not guaranteed that that whatever it is that you've drawn the conclusion of is actually the truth. So in that sense, since the scientific method does not allow you to know what is true and what is not true, but instead only gives you tentative ideas, I would assert that trying to start with the scientific method and trying to determine what is true will lead to skepticism. and I think that's where we're at. I mean, you can comment on that, or if you want to, I know you say you only have a few minutes, but if you want to take a swing at my worldview or something, you can do that too. It's up to you.
I mean, it's just it seems like you're arguing science as if science says I'm always right, and that's not the case. Science is a constant process. It's a constant movement towards the truth. It's never going to actually get there. It's just we learn more and more each time. Like there's going to be wrong things, there's going to be right things, but there's always going to be people trying to find those things and therefore verifying or disproving them and just continuing to build on all of these ideas that we have. Religion isn't like that. Religion has its set ideas and it allows for absolutely no change, no evolution, no even just keeping with current times.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were done. You can keep going.
No, there's just no flexibility.
Okay. Well, I know you said you had to go. I like to give whoever I invite on blindly the last word. So yeah. I'm letting you have the last word. So before we end the hangout, is there anything else you wanted to add to what you just said?
Not really. I pretty much said it all. Like religion is a lot more rigid and science is a lot more flexible, and I would tend to go to the one that's more open to changing with the times because things change. Like that's just reality. 100 years ago, a smartphone wouldn't even be a thing that we could fathom, and now we have a world of information in our hand at all times.
I still can't fathom my smartphone.
Yeah. So
all right.
I just think it's silly to believe in something that doesn't really allow for a whole lot of evolution with changing times.
All right. Well, Kat, I definitely, especially without us ever talking before, I appreciate you taking the step forward to come on. I was really wanting to have a good discussion, and I felt like we had a good discussion.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it.
And if you ever want to do it again, and maybe instead of me asking you a bunch of questions, you ask me a bunch of questions instead, then we can do that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right, well, we're going to go ahead and go off air. I want to respect Kat's time, and for everyone who watches, I hope this was edifying, and I hope that everybody gets something out of this and that they enjoyed the discussion. God bless.